then that was like a big issue with some of the managers, because they were like, well, we told you at the beginning of the release that at the end of 6 or 12 weeks we want like these specific things. But it was just hard because as you're going along, you find like, oh, this other thing we worked on like needs fixing or it needs updating or something like that. And so it's just ended up being kind of a big issue between like the engineers and the managers.
Yep. Well, that's almost always where the issue is. Engineers and managers, or engineers and marketers. Yeah. And it is a reality. I will state for the record of the video here that you guys just missed the whole discussion of this first slide. So if you're watching this on the video later, for those who aren't actually here, you got off easy. Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing I learned is to be really strict with requirements, like with the client, because we had this one situation where the client sent back, okay, just one extra feature, and we're like, okay, it's maybe 50 hours, we'll just let it slide. We're not going to rewrite the entire contract and re-estimate. Then like 2 weeks later, okay, another super small thing, and eventually it turned into like 1,000 extra hours of features he had added. And because we let him slip in one, he kept slipping him in, and we didn't see what we were getting ourselves into.
You have to embrace the power of no. This is a very common issue in failed projects, and particularly when I see as an expert witness, I get involved in failed projects, and you have a customer and a developer, and what you'll have is exactly what you're describing. The customer will ask for something that's outside the scope of the project. And the developer, wanting to be nice, wanting a good reputation, wanting, whatever they go, oh yeah, and it's being nibbled to death by ducks. They will keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I actually had a failed, actually the same one I just mentioned where the legacy system was this old Unix-based uppercase only thing. The consulting firm came in and did this very detailed spec, like a 200-page spec, screen by screen, everything they were going to do. And the customer said, and they gave them an estimate, said, here's what it's going to cost. The customer said, that's way too much money. And the consulting firm said, fine, we can start dropping features and we'll get to the level that you want. And so they did that. They cut out, about 30% of the features, and the price came in at where the customer wanted it. And the developer started developing it, and this was their own software. This wasn't from scratch development. It was their own accounting software, plus it had an attached programming environment so they could do this personnel management system. And they got through the first 3 milestones, and there was one more milestone before delivery, and the customer came back and said, well, can you add this feature back in? And pretty much like her said, well, okay, we can add this in. And then basically started trying to add back in all the features that had been cut for budget. And it was a fixed price bid. So they're trying to basically get everything back in there. And finally, the consulting firm said, made their 4th and final bill for it, and said, here is what we agreed to. You owe us the 4th milestone. And the customer tried to sue them and say, we want our money back, we want this, and they lost in arbitration. Arbitration said, no, they actually lived up to the contract. They delivered what they said they were going to deliver. You agreed to it. You owe them the money for the 4th milestone, plus you owe them all their attorney fees. Okay, approaches to building requirements. The requirements should form the baseline that defines. Okay, my first consulting job was at Aeronautical Radio Incorporated. They were one of the subcontractors. How many of you have heard of the Iridium satellite project? This was the global, the mighty are falling. This was a big thing 20 years ago. This was a transnational project to put up a group of 77 satellites so that you could get cell phone reception anywhere in the world, literally, out in the middle of the ocean, anywhere. Motorola was a prime driver on it and had a lot of subcontractors. ARINC was one of the subcontractors. They were doing the network management software for it. That had a disastrous design review. I got brought in. One of the first problems is they had no architecture. They had four subsystem diagrams. When I tried to mash them together, they didn't fit. There were not consistent connections among them. Plus they had like 30 developers producing about 20,000 lines of code. And I just come from Pages. I said, I have individual developers who produce 20,000 lines of code. Why do you have 30 people working on this? Anyway. But one of the problems was they had no baseline documentation. Literally the same week I started, Bob Millard came in from Motorola, prime contractor, and had a meeting with the staff there at Airing, with the action management, and said, where's your baseline documentation of what you're building? And managers all looked sort of puzzled, and he said, I'm going to be meeting with you weekly, and I expect a box here of documents that describes what you're building. It says, if you don't know what you're building, how do you know when you're done? That's a good maxim for you as you write your document, your requirements document. I'm not expecting these to be lengthy. I'll say that right up. Because for two reasons. One, you're going to change. And second, you've got, once again, how many of you have 3 or more programming classes right now? Yeah, that's why. But what you should describe is what you're going to have when you're done. You can choose how you want to describe it. Visually is great. The words is great. Function is great. But establish the baseline of what you're trying to build as per whoever it was who said also describe what you're not trying to build. There is a podcast on software requirements that you can watch. Focus on output and user interface and the results. Software flows from the output. The output determines what you have to be doing inside, and that determines what data and user input you need. And please organize your requirements into 2 sections. One is what you plan to present at your first demo, and the second is what additional features you plan to present at the second demo. You can browse through the wikis. By the way, I gave you all my error theft and copulation lecture, right? There are wikis out there from all the previous semesters. Just navigate up and navigate back down. Go look. Feel free to steal other people's requirements formats. Find one you like and say, I like this a lot. The best reuse is not code. The best reuse is only following documents and scripts. We discovered that. I spent a couple of years on a big corporate reuse project at Fannie Mae. And the single thing we found most useful there was reusing scripts. They were trying to do a universal loan object, and it had hundreds of data fields and hundreds of methods, and was a big bloated mess. So feel free to steal ideas and approaches from previous documents, and this is what your goal for Saturday night is. Any questions? Yes?
I know we're going to be putting all these things on GitHub and stuff, but
Yep.
because it seems like it's going to be updated throughout the semester, is it cool if we just post like a link to a live Google
A link
document?
is fine. A link to a live document is always fine. So that's actually preferable. I think I mentioned one of you had put your spreadsheet, your status report spreadsheet in a repository, and I had to literally download it and then open it up. So links are great. Google Doc links, whatever you want to do. Any other questions on requirements? Okay, so due by midnight is your requirements document on your project wiki page, or a link there too. Your next status report, which should also be available. And you should watch and mark off another podcast. If you've gotten behind on the podcast, DM me on Slack, and I will catch you some Slack, so to speak. Readings for next week, and it should all be correct now in the class calendar thing. Chapters 2, 7, and 14 of Mythical Man Month. Peopleware 5, Accelerate 4 and 6, and Webster's Reading 3. This is a fair amount of reading. But then again, you're still not doing much in the way of coding. At least most of you aren't, probably. Remember that you can count up to 2 hours of your reading and or podcast watching is billable. And And the next week, we're going to talk about project estimation and scheduling, because you're going to be doing PERT and Gantt charts for your projects. Keep in mind, this is all on a highly accelerated basis. You know, you're doing requirements this week. I'm not expecting book length requirements. I'm not actually expecting anything more than, I don't want to downplay it too much, but the better job you do on your requirements, the better your project will go. But I'm not expecting, you know, lengthy requirements. Any questions? Yes?
Remind me, for billable hours, you wanted to see around 5 hours a week, is that what it was?
5 to 7.
Okay.
And particularly once you get into coding, you know, I look at these, it used to require 7 hours a week, and you all had to report them individually, now you have to report them to your team, so your whole team knows who's doing what, which is part of the reason why it's on the status report. And as always, I reserve the right, because this comes up every semester, I'll look at a project and I'll see, you know, 6 hours, 5 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 2 hours. I reserve the right to lower your grade if you're just not contributing to the project. So, yes?
I had to like find stuff to do for an extra hour this last week.
Right. Doug, I'm not that worried for these next couple of weeks, because you're not really going to be coding for another week or two. Though, it wouldn't hurt to start figuring out what tools you're going to need, start mocking up what user interface you want, so on and so forth. But no, I'm not expecting much in the way of hours for the next few weeks. Which is another reason why I threw the reading and podcasting into there. Anything else? Feel free to come up and talk to Mike, whose company is always hiring. And if that's it, then you're all free to go. Look at that. Got out of here quick. So, see you all in a week.